Welcome to our first webinar. We're really delighted to be talking about self-management today. It's a topic close to my heart. We've been managing Karim's individualised funding since 2009, and it's been really working flexibly with us. We haven't transitioned to the NDIS yet, but we will be soon. I just wanted to also point out that the NDIA are committed to self-management, that at the moment the percentage of participants who are using the scheme are approximately 8% who are self-managing, but the NDIA would like this percentage to be raised up to 30%. So the reason why they are wanting that to be raised up to 30% is that self-management supports the principles of the scheme. It's an insurance-based scheme, and the principles of the scheme in terms of outcomes are increased independence, increased inclusion, and increased self-determination. And self-management really can meet and can help us to help our children to meet all of those three outcomes, as we will have much more choice and control over our funding and being able to meet the outcomes that we'd like our children to achieve or that our children would like to achieve. So Sam, I'm really delighted that you're the first guest that we have on our webinar series. Sam, you and I have known each other for some time. Sam sits on a subcommittee of the NDIA Independent Advisory Group. That's the self-management working group. And Sam, you're an incredibly passionate supporter of self-management, and you're a really strong advocate for people to use self-management under the NDIS. And so I'm just delighted that you're here today with us for our first webinar.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Sam. I'll just say a few words about you, Sam. Sam's worked as an advocate in the disability sector for many years. She's also been a parliamentary advisor, a family educator, board member, consultant for over 14 years. Her experience crosses sensory, autism spectrum, physical as well as intellectual disabilities. She parents two children who between them have extra disability and education and health needs, and it is she's a strong believer in building inclusive communities for all. I also just want to give a little plug for Sam's business, The Growing Space. Sam runs a business in South Australia. She's joining us from Adelaide tonight. Sam's business, The Growing Space, provides lots of really wonderful resources for families. Sam's business also provides, as I understand, self-management advice and support. Sam, is that correct?
We do.
And just tonight, I realised that Sam's Facebook page has over 8,000 subscribers or followers and over 8,500 likes. So she's got an incredible following. Sam only has to say something in her forthright manner, and there's hundreds of reposts and hundreds of comments. So if you want some good information, some reliable information, I really recommend that you subscribe to Sam's Facebook page, The Growing Space. So Sam, welcome.
Thank you.
Sam, I'm presuming that you're hearing me okay?
I am.
Okay, Sam, while we're talking this evening, participants in the webinar will also be joining us on Facebook, I believe, and they'll be posting questions on Facebook. But ahead of tonight's webinar, we've also had quite a lot of questions come in. So Sam, over to you to introduce yourself a little further and to tell us a little bit about your experience of self-managing.
Yep, sure, thank you. So I'm Sam. I'm mum to two boys with disability. Ben is 18, he has Down syndrome, it's intellectual disability. He's finishing year 12 this year. And my younger son is 15, and he was born a little bit early, and he's got quite a few hangovers from that. So we've been self-managing. I've been self-managing Bailey for about 4 years now, and Ben's just gone on to his second plan in February as well. So we've been doing it for quite a while. We advise a lot of people about self-management, about plan management and agency management, what the differences are and how it all works. And really, I think one of the biggest things that we do as a company is we really want families to always think about the least dangerous assumption. And that's really, really important to me. And least dangerous assumption is where you always assume that the person you love can do something before you assume that they can't.
So Sam, I just want to sort of pick up on that. So the people who are joining us tonight are family members who are alumni of the Now and Next program, and something that's really quite a strong theme in the program is from the very earliest possible time to have a mindset shift to really start thinking about your child and their strengths. And I think what you've just said there really resonates, I think, with all of the families who'll be listening in tonight who've completed that program, that it is so important that from the very earliest time we start thinking of our children in terms of their strengths and their unique abilities, not just their disabilities. That personality is there in the early days. We just have to look at it and find it and help it flourish.
Absolutely right.
So, so Sam, how have you found self-managing? Because your boys are in the scheme at the moment.
That's right. Yep.
You're self-managing. Generally, how are you finding it, and what advice would you have for parents in terms of those who are perhaps considering it and not really sure yet?
Sure. The process itself is really easy. You go places, you buy things, services and supports, you pay for them or you get an invoice, and then you put a claim in on the NDIS portal. The portal itself is actually quite easy to use. It doesn't have a lot of extraneous information in there. You basically go into the portal, you put in the date of the service, how much it cost you, and what part of your plan you want to take the money from. And then usually within 24 hours, certainly within 2 business days, the money will be deposited back into your bank account. So it's pretty good. I think there are a few things to be a little bit wary of. You always want to be careful. You're not allowed to claim until after you've spent the money. So you can't, if you want to go to a physio the next day and pay, you wouldn't want to take the money out of the portal the night before. You need to do that afterwards. So it can help to have a credit card, to put things on a credit card, then make your claims and pay off your credit card the next day. Not everyone's got the opportunity or the ability to have a credit card, but if you can, that can make things a lot easier for people.
So Sam, you're finding it fairly straightforward, is from what I can understand from your comment. It's nothing daunting or difficult. Would you compare it to sort of the experience of self-management in terms of the administration to some other aspect of managing the administration of your personal life?
I'm actually very low tech with my administration. Most of the families I advise, I don't advise them to do it as low tech as I do. But what I honestly do is I print up every invoice or receipt. I make my claims. I take a screenshot, or I print the claims after it's come up on the computer on the portal, and then I just staple it to the receipts and I throw it in the folder. So most people do a spreadsheet or use an app or do all these fancy things. Money is just not my thing. So I just staple it. I staple it and I throw it in the drawer, and that's it.
I'm giggling because that's what we've been doing since 2009.
Really?
Really low tech. However, my partner has fortunately agreed that he's going to take over self-managing when Karim transfers to the NDIS, and he's a lot more comfortable with more efficient processes than my staples and folders kind of process.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably starting to grow out of the staples and folders, but I still don't want to keep a spreadsheet. So what I may end up doing is paying someone else to do that for me, and I can use my NDIS money to do that.
Right. Well, that brings us to sort of a question that maybe we can start with, which is we have a question from a parent here that says, just wondering about plan management versus self-management. I know you have the flexibility of non-registered and registered providers when you're self-managing, so you can go with non-registered providers. But what do you think are the most important benefits of self-management?
Over plan management?
Plan management, yeah. And just explain in relation to your last comment about being ready to hand over another part of the admin.
I think there's even more flexibility in self-management than there is plan management. There's not a lot. It depends a lot on who your plan manager is. So some plan managers will stick to the price caps and the price guide, for example, but other plan managers won't. So it's actually really important that if you do make a decision to use plan management, that you interview the plan manager pretty deeply and find out exactly how they operate. Will they pay things on time? Do they have an app where you can track what's going on, or a spreadsheet that they share with you? Will they pay above the price guide? So for most of the supports and services that we use as self-managers, we pay less than the NDIS price caps. But there are a couple that we pay more. So our psychologist, for example, she charges $220 an hour, whereas the NDIS price cap is $178. But we're happy to do that. We've got a relationship with her. She has 30 years of experience. We think she's worth that extra money. I'm happy to give up some of that money because, to be frank, I save it in other areas. I pay my workers great wages, but I still don't spend as much as what I would if I went through an agency.
So if you're self-managing, then you're not limited to the price cap?
Correct.
And then it's your decision if you
That's
choose
right.
to spend someone who costs a little bit more, because that's your choice. You're making savings in other parts of your package.
Yeah, that's right. So an example of that might be, and it might not be as relevant for the younger families, but for older families, when you have core supports and the person that you love doesn't want to stay with you all the time. So my son is 18. He is, you know, if he did not have the disability, he would be off with his mates up the river or down the beach for the weekend and doing those sorts of things. Under NDIS self-management, what I can do is I can pay the worker a higher than regular rate, and the worker can then be booking the accommodation and doing it that way.
We're going to pick up that point of the worker in a moment, because there's quite a few questions around the worker.
Yeah,
so, we're going to hold off on that. And the questions are coming in through Facebook, so thank you for posting, everyone. We've also got some questions that have been preloaded as well, and we hope to get to all of your questions tonight. I'm trying to group the questions with a few more sort of in principle, self-management, plan management, what they're about, versus there's a whole lot of practical questions lined up tonight, and hopefully before the end we can fire through some of those practical ones as well. If you see me looking away, I'm also taking some cues from someone who's handing me those Facebook questions as well. So
great.
I'm not off wandering with the fairies. So so there's another question that's on this that's related to that one, and then we'll move off plan management. Could you just again reiterate what you think people need to look out for when they're choosing a plan manager, and what are the non-negotiables?
Yep. So you want to always ask your plan manager, how long do they take to pay the bills? Because if they take a month, if they only do their bills every month, some of your providers might get a bit antsy about that. They might not like that. Ask your plan manager how they notify you of the bills. So if sometimes your providers send the bills directly to the plan manager, how are you going to know that you've approved them? Because you want to keep track and make sure that no providers are not putting in bills that are incorrect. So that's going to be important. It's going to be important to ask them whether they pay above the price cap or not, because some will and some won't. It will depend on their how they see reasonable and necessary. And there are some advantages to having a smaller plan manager, a small plan management provider, but you want to find out from them what's their backup plan. If they get sick or they go away on holidays, who's going to pay the bills while they're away? Is there someone else looking after that for you? And on the flip side, if you're choosing a large provider, you want to ask them, well, can I have one-to-one point person? Is there one person that I can always talk to, so that I don't have to retell things all the time? Mm-hmm. So there are advantages for big providers and small providers. So you've got to choose what's right for you.
Thanks for that. There's some great tips there. Just remember that to sort of keep those questions coming, and we'll make our way through all of the questions tonight. Sam, just in terms of, before we move on to some more practical ones, there's about 3 or 4 questions here that relate to self-management and reasonable and necessary. So I'll read a couple of them and then I'll hand over to you. So one question says, I hear a lot of talk about being flexible and creative with funding, but exactly how creative can you be, especially thinking about ways to use capacity building funding, as many children's plans, 6 and under, don't have a core component?
Yeah, it's a really good question, particularly for those little tackers plans that don't have that core funding in there. I'm going to guess some of you have heard about this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Have you all heard about therapy assistants?
Yes, there's a few questions about therapy assistants.
Yeah, so therapy assistants is one. Yeah, it's one really good way to stretch your dollars further in your plan and to have a bit of flexibility. So if you look at it, a physio could meet you once a week and they could spend 1 hour with your child and working with you and your child. Or what if you did physio every fortnight, and on the alternating fortnight, you spent that $178, which would buy you, 4 hours of a therapy assistant or a support worker that was trained to take your child down to the playground and do some work with them on their gross motor skills. So you could then use that 4 hours to be the time that you spent time with your other child, or it could be time that you go and have your medical appointment or do whatever it is that you need to do. And I think that's a really good way to look at stretching your funding. If you're agency managed, you're almost Yeah, very unlikely to be able to find a registered therapy assistant. Most therapists are not really keen on this model yet. But if you're self-managed, I mean, what we do, for example, is we go up to the university and I send a message to the university and I say to the speech department or the OT Student Society, I go into the Facebook groups, I weasel my way in, and then I put up an ad that says, I'm looking for an OT student that can help my child with learning to cook. Can someone come and help with my kid baking cookies once a week? And then they could spend 4 hours doing that under the guidance of the OT. So the OT could lay out the plan, and then the therapy assistant or the OT student could actually implement the plan. And that can knock over a whole lot of birds with one stone.
Yeah, the issue of using therapy assistants, as I said, we're introducing them here at Plumtree, and I would recommend to families. Yeah, it's been really actually successful. Think about it where your child's got a goal, your little child's got a goal where some repetition and sort of some intensity is needed. So, learning some particular skill that it's just not feasible to expect for that skill to emerge unless there's some concerted effort put in there. And I really like that you've recommended families to think a little bit laterally, because I think therapists are an important part of our life and they're an important resource.
Yeah.
But I'd also say whatever therapy assistant you're using is to make sure that they're connected or supervised by, in early childhood intervention, they would be connected with the therapist and working under the therapist. So that
we would always recommend. We would always recommend that a family actually bring that therapy assistant to the therapy appointments as well.
Exactly.
And that stretches it. And then everybody's learning as well, because, as you probably have gone all the way through your courses, that your child's best therapist is always you. You are always going to do the best job. So
we believe that.
Yeah, well, it's true. It's true. I read research recently that blew me away. It was about little kids with Down syndrome and learning to walk. I don't know if I've told you this before, but just like to share it with everyone that they did a big study on intensive physiotherapy for young children with Down syndrome and how soon it made them walk. And what they discovered was having intensive physiotherapy as opposed to a consultative model where they trained the families, the child walked 6 weeks earlier on average. And you sort of think, is it worth all that energy, all that drainage of taking your kid to all these appointments, when really you could maybe see the physio once a month and they could be working with you and with a therapy assistant to stretch that money further and do a better job.
So the questions has come in. So if you plan manage, can you have a therapy aid?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes,
great.
Definitely.
Thanks for that question. I'll just double check. There are some other questions around flexibility before we move off the topic of flexibility. And there are a lot of really practical questions here. Can you tell us some more about flexibility? Can you tell me what is considered a stated support? If my plan says a certain number of hours of assessments under improved daily living, do I have to use those funds for assessments? I can answer that one, yes. If it's a stated amount, you must use that. You can't spend stated amounts on anything else.
You don't have to do the assessments, but you can't spend that money on anything other than assessments.
Thank you. That's very clear. So that one's answered. And there's another question. Can you tell me, though this is a good one too, can you tell me the top 5 ways I can be creative with my child's funding? We only have improved daily living under capacity building.
Yeah, okay. So the first one's going to be therapy. You've really thrown me on the spot here.
Really good questions, guys.
That's right. They're great questions. The first one will be the therapy fund, the therapy assistant. And I think a lot of it is around, can I talk about all the different ways you can use therapy assistants? Would that count as 5?
Yes.
All right. So a therapy assistant could help establish a nighttime routine for a child while you went out to the movies with your husband or your partner. Yeah. So that's one thing you could do.
Wow, that's great. That's kind of respite effect, but not asking for a respite segregated.
Yeah, and it's not respite. You are getting a break, sure, but
the effect is a break. But your child's getting meaningful intervention where they're practicing some of the skills that are priorities.
Yep. Assuming some of you know other families with children in similar situations, how about getting an OT to work with 2 of your children at once, rather than just this always one-to-one appointment? So then you could be working on turn taking and social skills and things as well. You could use your capacity building, improved daily living skills to let me think. Do an assessment of your house and safety. So sometimes people don't really think about the extra safety requirements. When you've got a 5-year-old that's still crawling, that's not walking yet, and they're at the ground level, there are going to be other things that might be a little dangerous for them that you wouldn't have thought of with a regular 10 or 11-month-old. So it might be good to actually have the OT come in and do a bit of an assessment of your house and have a look and see, what are the things that we should think about here, or what is the furniture that we should get that will help. So a low coffee table with a pool noodle around the edges might be a great way to help someone learn to cruise. Who knows? Mm-hmm. Is that 5?
No, not yet. But I just have one that I'd like to ask you if you've seen parents doing this. Often Saturday sport and managing other children. I often hear that parents say, "I just want to be a soccer mum." But when I take my other children to netball or soccer, I have to look after little Bobby, and I'm actually just not a mum there supporting my other children who are playing Saturday sport. Have you seen any parents using their their daily living under capacity building to help with that?
So this is an interesting one. We've got a lovely family here in South Australia that have got a little girl with cerebral palsy, and her big sister was doing gymnastics, and the little girl was doing gymnastics as well. But there's a little bit of a different situation, but could still be applied. Mum had to get down on the floor with the 5-year-old and do the gymnastics with her, because she needed that one-on-one support. And what it meant was that she missed out on watching her other daughter, and it also meant she missed out on sitting in the stands, socializing and getting to know the other parents, which meant that her daughter then missed out on the play dates and all of the other things that were happening in the background. So what she did was she actually paid one of the other gymnastics instructors out of her capacity building money for the hour to be one-on-one with her daughter. And so that young woman had become effectively a therapy assistant during the gymnastics session to help her with the stretches and whatever else. But it was also someone that was employed by the Gymnastics Association. So it was someone that knew the program, had the skills, and was definitely capacity building for that little girl. So she then got to watch her other daughter or sit up in the stands and chat with the other parents, which then started to build more social networks for the whole family.
I love how these examples are win-win. Like the NDIA and the funding, and the funding are supposed to be to help people just get on with their lives. And so much in those very early years when children are little and families are growing is just about making, you want your child to develop who has the additional needs, but you also need to keep the rest of the family together and be who you need to be. Examples really are a win-win for other members.
Another example too is that capacity building funds can actually be used to support siblings. So if you wanted to have a one-on-one consulting with Siblings Australia, for example, who can provide that one-on-one, that can be done through capacity building supports. Or you might want to see a psychologist around issues that are happening for the sibling. That is very much allowable. It's very unlikely to be able to happen under agency management, but if you are self or plan management, that is, that could well be very reasonable and necessary for many families.
I don't know if that's 5. We might have even got to 5 or maybe even 6 then.
We've done all right.
You have. Do your therapy assistants need to be registered?
Not if your plan is self or plan managed.
Okay, well
but that said, you don't want to go hire the 12-year-old next door. That's not going to work as the therapy assistant most of the time. You're going to want to get a student of that discipline that you're working on. Or it might not be a student, it might be an SSO from the school that might be quite well versed in speech, that practices on using the Prolo Quo. So that would be a great therapy assistant, would be get someone that actually already uses Prolo Quo to go at work as a therapist, as a SSO or ESO. I don't know what you call them in New South Wales, but to have that person then come home and one afternoon a week do a couple of hours work under the capacity building funding.
Or use a progressive provider who's actually training the therapy assistants. So you'll be
that would be fantastic. I'm so glad you guys are doing this, but a lot of
we're learning.
Most therapists are not doing it.
We're learning. I guess it's a learning curve for everybody, but just really making sure, I think, that whoever you choose to work with your son or daughter gets along with your son or daughter. I know that that's Karim's priority. He chooses the people that work with him in his life. Yeah, and he chooses pretty young blondes, if he's choosing a girl, or chooses hip young guys who are really creative and interesting and fun to be with if they're guys. So yeah,
there's a great follow-on question to this that's just come up on the screen there that asks about whether the insurances and things are covered by hiring the gymnastics assistant. Yeah, look, it's just a gymnastics assistant at the gym. And the invoice is coming not from that particular person, but from the gym itself, from the gymnastics club. They're fully covered. They have all their insurances. So yes, that's covered. Couldn't do it if you're agency managed though. Would not work. The local gym is not going to be an agency registered provider. But if they just give you an invoice and their invoice states one-to-one support, there you go. Or one-to-one therapy support.
Thanks for clarifying that. And I'm glad you can see the questions popping up on the screen.
I can't see the Facebook ones, but I can see the ones on the Zoom thing.
Well, if I'm getting both, so if you see a question that relates to what we're talking about, please feel free to kind of extend and go ahead and answer that one. Otherwise, I'm keeping a little tab, and we hope we get through them all. All right, I think that's pretty much. I think maybe now that's those kind of. Well, just before we move off, just what can we say about reasonable and necessary?
Oh, what can we say?
If you're self-managing,
show you guys.
Self-managing, what do what are your responsibilities in terms of, do you do something or not? What guides you? Okay.
What guides me is this, and this is made up from this. This is can you see that it's laminated? It's all shiny and plastic. I give this to every family we serve. It is a laminated copy of the reasonable and necessary provisions from the NDIS Act. Because when we all talk about reasonable and necessary, we're not saying, oh yeah, that's reasonable, yeah, that's necessary. It's actually defined in the NDIS Act, and it's actually fairly broad. So if you guys can all get a copy of this, Sylvana can send it to you. I've done it so that I've got a little checklist on the back, and I go through, and every time I think of something that I think I want to spend the money on, but I'm not quite sure, I go through and I have a look at whether it's reasonable and necessary. So the first thing do you want me to go through what they are, Sylvana?
Yeah, sure, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Very instructive.
Yeah, so the first one is it disability related? Do I need it because of my disability? So if you're asking for someone to transport your child to gymnastics as a 6-year-old, is that disability related? Or would you have to take your regular 6-year-old to gymnastics? I guess we're going to say no, because everybody has to take a 6-year-old places, right? So that wouldn't be covered. You couldn't pay for transport. But let's say it's that one-to-one support in the class. That's disability related, isn't it? Because if that little girl did not have cerebral palsy, we would not need to fund that one-to-one support. Goals. Does it help the person towards their goals? So sticking on this example with this little tacker, is it going to help her towards her goals? Is it going to improve her mobility and her strength? Is it going to help her make friends and be social? Yes. There's hardly any goal that's not going to help. The next is social and economic participation. Does it help her be part of her family, part of her community, part of the world around her? No question about that one. Is it value for money? Well, yeah, it's an awful lot cheaper than having a physio, isn't it? So that's a really good value for money. Is it effective, beneficial, and good practice? Is it likely to actually work? Is it likely to be good for her? I think we've seen that already. We know it's good for her. And does it meet family, friends, and community expectations? Would you expect a mum to get on the floor and do that with a 5-year-old in the gymnastics class? I could tell you that all of the other 5-year-olds in the class do not have their mum crawling around on the floor with them. So I think it's very reasonable that a worker could do that. And then the last one, is it the most appropriate funding body? Should it be paid for by the Education Department? No. The Health Department? No. The Justice Department? No. So yes, it is. NDIS is definitely the most appropriate funding body. So if I had gone through this little list with that family, I would be able to tick each of those off very easily. Now, as parents, we don't actually get to decide what is actually reasonable and necessary. Only the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and the Supreme Court of Australia can actually make a genuine, real decision. Even when your planner makes a decision, it's not necessarily a final decision. But what we can do is we can, I guess, cover our butts at some level and do this and have this as a little backup for us.
So that to me is an example of the way we as self-managing families would be managing our risk. So we'd be checking off, we'll post that, I'll get that copy from you and I'll get Stacey to post that around families and to post it on Facebook. Just also want to say that Jennifer Henry, who runs a lot of our NDIS workshops here at Plumtree, she's Jennifer Williamson. I'm so sorry. Henry is.
Say Jennifer Plumtree.
Jennifer's also done a nice one-pager that takes people through reasonable and necessary. And I think once you're starting to get your head around what's reasonable and necessary, and again, it's just managing the risk for yourself as a self-manager, making sure that what you're going to buy is reasonable and necessary.
Can I talk about that risk a little bit too?
Sure. I think talking about managing risk close to us, our families, is a really good topic.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know too that under the NDIS Act, there's a difference between fraud and misuse. So when you commit fraud, you're doing something that's genuinely naughty. So fraud under NDIS might be going out and buying a whole bunch of nappies, selling them the next day on Gumtree and pocketing the money, right? That would be fraud. That's evil, that's deceit, that's, you know, making money off the NDIS. If, however, you bought the wrong size of nappies accidentally and you'd claimed them and then you had to buy a new lot, would that be fraud or would that be misuse?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you put your claims for your funding, if you put it under the wrong category, or you checked all of this off, but the NDIS maybe disagree with you a little bit, that's misuse. And there's no criminal offence in that. You're not going to be in deep trouble for doing that. So it's important to be a little bit brave and to take some risks and do what's going to work for your family, because what the NDIS are really interested in is not even this. It's, are you achieving outcomes?
Yeah.
So if it's working, if you're getting somewhere with it, go for it, do it.
That's consistent with the insurance-based principle. Spending
Absolutely.
now to create a better outcome for your son or daughter in the future and less drain on the system. Look, in the end, it's a win-win. They'll have a happier life, as well as the government will be investing in our children for a better future. I just also want to say on the issue of fraud is there is a misconception out there that that self-management is a risk to the NDIA because people will abuse the funds. And I'm sure that you're familiar with all of the research. The NDIA themselves have looked into this. The risk of self-managing funding is the lowest compared to any other sort of system. I think it's a fallacy that people perceive that self-management is risky. Have you got anything to say that?
I do. Do you know what the error rate is among agency managed plans for providers making the wrong claims?
What is it?
18%.
So 18% error rate with plan managed.
With agency managed.
With agency managed. So yeah. I don't know the exact percentage of the issue with fraud, but I know that there is a strong perception out there.
3%.
Yeah, it's tiny. It's tiny.
Compared to the error rate in agency management, it's absolutely minuscule.
And the thing is that when you're self-managing, I can say that we've done this since 2009, that you're stretching your funds and you're so careful of your funds. It's your son or daughter's funds. And so you're doing as much as you can to maximize that and save it so that you can do other interesting things for your son and daughter as they might desire.
You bet.
Well, I think we've done a bit of reasonableness necessary there. Before we move on to heaps of practical things, I just want to address an issue that there's quite a few questions about, which is recruiting staff. So, Sam, you've talked a little bit about recruiting a therapy assistant, but there's a few questions here in terms of hiring people. And so I'll read one that's in relation to employing people through HireUp. So I've had a few friends ask about using someone like HireUp when you're self-managing to employ a therapy assistant or a support worker. What records do you keep of what the support worker or the therapy aide or assistant did from week to week or session to session? So that's a question about what records do you need to keep? Do they need particular qualifications? I think we've handled that one. So as long as you're confident that they're being supervised and that they're joining in with a therapist and that they mature enough to know what they're doing and getting value for money for you out of your package. We know it stretches the money further, but some of the practicalities seem hazy and unclear with the NDS. So that was really employing a therapy assistant or using HireUp to employ somebody. So what records do you have to keep?
What records do I keep?
What are we required to keep?
Yeah, there are no requirements for self-managers.
Oh,
no.
okay.
Yeah,
okay,
there's none.
So
at the
you're satisfied that
at review time, when it comes to your annual review, you're going to want to provide evidence that you've been working towards outcomes. Your therapists are going to write reports on the things that have been achieved and what needs to what you're working towards, how much progress you've made towards your goals. The NDIS are not even likely to ask you whether you've spent your money on therapy assistants or on a therapist. And if they do, you can put that, you'll be able to say with confidence, well, we hired a physio student to do some work with my child for half of that time. And as long as the physio's report is backing up that work, there's no need to keep records for that stuff. Okay. Our best therapy assistant we found at Woolworths. We found him at Woolies on the checkout, and he connected with my son. And after about the 4th visit through, I said to Adam, so Adam, do you work here full time? What do you do? He said, oh no, I'm a student. I said, what do you study? He said, OT. And I'm like, yes. And we hired him. Within a week, he was signed up in Higher Up because he had all his clearances. He had all of those things already due to his studies as occupational therapy. And he worked with my son, taking him to the gym twice a week for a good probably about, a long time, over a year.
Well, Karim's found all his workers through the interests that he has. We've been quite careful and worried about who is working with Karim and how they're involved in our family life. And with Karim, trust is obviously something, and safety is obviously a high priority for us. Just extending that question, there's another one on a similar vein. I'm trying to find someone who can come to my child's preschool for 1 hour a week to be an augmentative and alternative communication partner with my son. I want to know if there are any qualifications or requirements to hire someone, what should be the hourly rate, and what kind of records do I keep? So should I assume that he or she will pay his own tax again? So similar question to the therapy aid, but perhaps you're doing it through...
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know how much use 1 hour a week is in that situation. I think in that situation, you actually probably would want a speech therapist going in, because you actually want to train everyone else that works at the childcare or the kindy. And a therapy assistant or a more junior person without that skill set is probably not as able to train the other staff, or might not even be taken as seriously, if I'm really upfront. So I'm not sure that would be that valuable to come in for 1 hour. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, with augmentative and alternative communication, Karim's an AAC user, highly specialised area. So I'd be... It
really is.
Speech pathologist who's very expert in that. What we're doing here is we're recognising that one thing, like, it needs lots of volume. Karim's still practicing learning his AAC device, and he's 27. Admittedly, technology has improved recently. But what you really do need, and I've actually tested out our Plumtree model on Abdul Karim, so we actually developed the model with him as the guinea pig. So what we realised was you need an expert speech pathologist who's experienced in AAC, who works with you to kind of do the preliminary assessments, get to know him or your child, and then plan how that's going to be repeated. And then that person trains up another person who's actually been trained in actually knowing how to do it. So we've got some of our support workers have been trained by Plumtree staff to act as communication assistants with Karim. So they practice and practice and practice. But again, why would we practicing for a couple of hours a week at $175 an hour when we can get the therapy assistant through at $40 an hour or whatever is the higher up rate?
The other half of that question is how do you actually hire them and have that insurance and what have you. So if someone is hired through Higher Up, they will have all of their clearances, and that will be imperative, because no childcare is going to allow someone into their centre that doesn't have all of those clearances. So that's going to be really important. If someone is hired through Higher Up, all of their insurances are covered. So public liability, work cover, all of those things are covered when you go through Higher Up. If you hire them independently yourself, if you actually set them up and pay them yourself, you actually employ them, then you're going to be responsible for a whole lot of those insurances. If they're a contractor and you're contracting them, they will need to be responsible for their own insurances.
So that relates to a question I think that we didn't quite answer, which someone's just posted. Does that therapist, if you go out and find a private therapist, do they need to be registered if you're self-managing?
If you're self-managed, no, but you're going to want to check any therapist that they actually have the qualifications that they say they do. You can go to the AHPRA website. You all know about AHPRA,
PRA, yes.
PRA, type in the name of the therapist and just check. You might be surprised that some therapists have conditions on their work that they're not allowed to work with children, or you know, they've got certain restrictions on what they're doing. So it's actually quite important to check in just for your own well-being. It's not required by the NDIS, but it is quite prudent to do that with any therapist that you're using.
Actually, we haven't talked about safety, and I'll just mention something here, and I'll ask Stacey if we can make sure that we actually figure out how we distribute. We've got a whole pile of resources that were produced in New South Wales, Child Safe, and so it really speaks to, there's some booklets and some brochures on, and a couple of videos, or at least one video, on what parents should be thinking about in terms of who you choose to work with your child if you self-manage or plan manage, and if you're actually maintaining that extra level of control and choice over who's working with your child, what things do you need to consider? And I would like to mention one very important thing, which is a little bit of being in my hijab about this one, is a lot of private therapists want to see your child, or perhaps the parents encourage the therapist to see their child on their own, and there's no visibility between the parent who's outside of the room, which I would never recommend. I would always say the point of the therapist is to build your capacity, not to work directly with your child. That's where you have a therapy assistant. Whoever works with your child, you should be there. You should have line of sight. You should never leave your child alone with anybody, not even a therapist. That is what I encourage and expect of the team that work here. I think it's right for my staff, it safeguards them, but it's right for your children. And I think with this increased level of responsibility, we touched on risk a little earlier on, but I think that there are some things now that we need to think through. Of course, we're all very careful about who is going to spend time with our child, but things like police checks and other things, I think it's really worth us to explore that a little bit. So I think two really big themes so far that we can take on after this is the use of therapy assistance, and I think managing risk and really knowing how to manage risks around managing your self-managed funding.
And it's more than managing risks. You're not going to learn. A therapist is only there for 45 minutes a week. You're the one that's implementing that plan, the parent. So the parent needs to be there.
Music to my ears, Sam. I'm always on about that. I think everybody thinks I'm a broken record. Just one question before we move on to some other sort of housekeeping issues. We've got, not housekeeping issues, but practical things. We've got about just over 10 minutes left. If you're self-managing, can you self-manage if you've got support coordination in your plan?
Okay, that's a tricky one. Support coordination, it'll depend on what's written in your actual paper plan. So not what you see on the portal, but when you download that paper plan, each line will say at the bottom, each budget line will have a line at the bottom that says how the support will be paid. Often, in fact, nearly always, support coordination is agency managed, which means you do actually need to choose an agency registered support coordinator. It will depend on the individual plan. Some planners always make it agency managed. Some will give it a bit of leeway and make it plan managed. Some will even make it self-managed. But the vast majority of support coordination is put into plans as agency managed, which means you do actually need to hire a agency registered support coordinator.
So just before we leave the therapy, there's lots of questions. Therapy assistant. Someone has said, I'm studying to be an OT, can I be the therapy assistant? Now, this is a hot topic because I feel
the therapy assistant.
I feel strongly, I guess what this question is
can I be paid to?
Yeah, or a family member, can you be paid?
No, NDIS is not there to replace natural family supports. So you cannot be paid to provide those supports. Often I get people asking, can I use grandma to do some of the respite or the core supports work? And my response to that is that it's very hard to fire grandma when she doesn't do a good job. So it is very, very difficult. It sets you up for all kinds of failures to pay family members, and it's not allowed. It's point blank not allowed. Unless you are living in a very, very, very remote community and there's only 5 people on your cattle station, then you may be able to get an exclusion, but you actually have to get a specific exclusion for your case direct from the NDIS. So no, you cannot hire family members to do work.
Just one more quick question about the child safe. So one question has come in, should we, if we're considering hiring somebody, what do we need to think about? Police check, working with children check. So the question, the answer there is, in New South Wales, a working with children check includes a police check, but we'll get Stacey to post the child safe resources in the video on our Facebook page. They have been posted there in the last couple of weeks by Mana at the main Plumtree, the open public Plumtree Facebook page. But to save you all going and searching, Stacey will post it on the alumni page.
And another one that we always require of all of our therapy assistants and workers is that they have a current first aid certificate.
Okay, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, so into the practical things right now. Okay, so before I read out too many of the questions, I just thought if you could take me through just what you do. Again, you said it at the top of the webinar. Just take me through. Do you need a separate account? Do you need a credit card? How does self-management work?
Right, so if you self-manage, I think generally the easiest way is to have a credit card. But if you don't have a credit card, you're going to need to build yourself up some kind of float, or you're going to have access to at least a little bit of money to pay things and then be reimbursed. Most of your providers are going to be fine giving you an invoice, and that will be either 7 or 14 day terms, and that's fine. Make your claim, get the money and pay the bill. There will sometimes be things where you can't do that and you'll need to pay the money up front, make your claim and get paid. It is good to have a separate bank account. It helps with the account with keeping track of the money, what's coming in and going. But it is not actually a legal requirement. So if you don't want to do it, or if you just want to get an extension account on your home account, if you've already got accounts and you just want to put an extra extension account, that's fine too. You can find, there are plenty of banks and community banks that will set up accounts that don't charge fees if they know NDIS money is flowing through them. They're quite good about that.
Okay, so this could be just another, okay, that one's not quite on topic. I'll just hang on to that one. That's a tutoring topic. So I'll just put that down and we'll just come to that in a moment. We'll just handle some of the practical things around the finances. So I really like how simple it is to make claims on the portal, but it is almost too simple. I wish there was a notes column where I could at least state which therapist provided a service, what methods of keeping track of receipts, etc. do you recommend? Have you heard any great ways families are keeping records? Are there any apps that are good?
Excellent question. Many families just put together spreadsheets and they just use Excel or Google Sheets you can do, and that's a free, don't have to buy Google Sheets. And then it's also stored on the cloud so you can access it from anywhere, which can be quite useful. My little nifty trick around self-management is when you go into the portal, there's a section there where you can look at all the claims you've already made. If you don't put in dates, if you don't fill in any of the little bits and you just press submit, up will come a list of all the claims you've ever made. If you, on your computer, if you grab the top left corner and drag your mouse down to the diagonally opposite corner, so you click and select all of that, press copy, go to your Google Sheets or your Excel spreadsheet, press paste, and it will all come out in your spreadsheet. It is very pretty. Then what you can do is you can add an extra couple of columns at the end. And the extra columns, one column might be the name of the provider and the other column might be the invoice number. Or you might even have another column and say what they achieved in that session if you want to keep really good records of those things. There's no obligation to do that. But if you want to do that, and I know a lot of people are really into that, I'm just not, you're welcome to do that. And it's a great way of just copying and pasting those payment request details from the portal straight into your spreadsheet. There are also some apps. I think Plan Tracker is one. My Plan Manager are launching one soon. I think there's quite a few around. They cost around $10 to $15 a month. If you don't have core funding in your plan, it's probably going to be a little harder to get that across the line in terms of claiming on your plan. Because certainly also if you've only got capacity building supports in there, you probably actually don't have all that many bills to manage. So it's probably easy enough to just put it.
That's what a lot of families tell. A lot of families with very young children are telling us that the money is in that category, and so that they just said it's extremely straightforward.
It's very easy when you're just doing one category like that.
So just on that portal question, do you still need service bookings in the portal if you're self-managed?
No service bookings, except for any agency managed line. So if you do have support coordination in there and that's agency managed, then you'll need a service booking for that particular line item, but you won't need it for anything else.
Okay, we're racing through a couple of those last ones in the last 5 or so minutes, and I've just been impressed, incredibly impressed how quickly we've run through over 20 to 30 questions tonight. So it's been fantastic, and thanks to everybody who's provided questions earlier on tonight, as well as provided them while we're talking live. Thank goodness this is going to be recorded and you can go back, because some of that stuff that you referred to in the portal, I just was glazing over, but I'm really glad when it comes time that I'm actually doing it or my husband's doing it, we're going to be pressing rewind and we're going to be listening and listening and listening. So there'll be a few others out there who maybe feel the same.
I haven't sworn today. That's not on record. That's great.
Okay. Can you tell me about a little bit about sensory equipment and clothing? Can you claim these against the cost of your child's claim?
Yeah, that's a tough one. NDIS have found that there's no evidence to compression clothing for autism and sensory needs. So they are declining that pretty frequently now. I'm not seeing any approvals on that recently. That said, if you've got evidence that it works for your child, then I would go for it. I know that's a basic answer. Some equipment that people think should be able to be bought through the plan actually do need the support of an OT. So a weighted blanket, for example, is not something that you should take out of your plan without going through the proper channels, because weighted blankets have been known actually to to suffocate children, so or to put too much weight on them.
So are you saying basically use your little sheet, your reasonable and necessary, to cross-check whether or not you feel comfortable that you have made sure that you feel
correct,
it's reasonable and necessary? Okay, just another quick one here. I've been funded for assessments for mobility equipment. Can you tell me what to do next? What is the process?
Yep, so you're going to need to go and find a physio or an OT that can prescribe equipment. And spend some time with them. They will do the process. You actually don't need to do that, the process. They will go away, they will work with your child, they'll figure out what you need, they'll talk to you. You're in control of this. You help them, they will help you decide what equipment that you want. They will write up a prescription which will be sent into the NDIS. This process is quite convoluted, but I'll go through it briefly. So once they write up that sort of prescription, that prescription won't be necessarily for a particular item, but for a type of item. So someone might need a manual wheelchair or a standing frame. That then goes into the NDIS. The NDIS then says, yep, we approve a wheelchair, now give us a quote for a particular type of wheelchair. Then the OT will come back and do a full assessment, or they may have already done it in their original meeting, and then they'll put in that assessment, that prescription request. Money goes into your plan. Don't know how you're doing it in New South Wales. In some states you are required to use a state equipment supplier, in others you're not, and you can self-manage and go and buy that. But once you're approved for a piece of equipment, you cannot buy any other piece of equipment. You can only buy the specific individual piece of equipment for which you've been approved. That said, all of this is changing. So the whole assistive technology process is changing because it's been quite traumatic and slow, and you know, it's been quite distressing for a lot of people. And the agency is onto that. They're fixing it. They've got a great plan in place. I believe that's going to be launched in July. So we'll see. That process will probably change a bit, and that's a good thing.
So the tip there is talk to some professionals who can help you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And generally it'll be an OT or a physio.
Great. And who's got experience in equipment prescription? We've got to
Absolutely,
say.
yes.
Two more sort of miscellaneous questions before we close. Someone has written in to ask, can you use your self-managed funding to pay for a tutor to help your child with some educational goals?
Right. So you know how when we listed that, we went through that reasonable and necessary? And one of the questions on the bottom there was the most appropriate funding body. So right down the bottom. And in that situation, the most appropriate funding body for that is the school. So the school should be providing the support that your child needs to learn. You should not have to have a tutor. So NDIS money cannot be used for a tutor. That said, depending on the needs of your child, is it actually tutoring that they need, or do they need organisational management? So for an older child, for example, a teenager that has memory issues and is not able to keep track of all of their assignments, it might be that you have someone who happens to be a teacher who's not actually helping them with homework, but is helping them organise their week. because you would not expect a school to usually do that for an older kid. But actual tutoring, teaching reading and writing to a school-aged student, that's a no-go. That is more appropriately funded by the state education system or the school that they attend.
All right. Final miscellaneous question, which kind of relates to something we talked about earlier, but I missed it at the right time. But I think it's a nice one to end on because it's really consistent with that aim of getting children out in the community and being a part of what is happening. And one parent says, we only have capacity building daily activities funds. Aside from speech, OT and behavioural support, what other supports can I use the fundings for? She wants her son to participate in some social group activities like a social skills group or a disability specific swimming lesson or music therapy or any other kind of opportunities for social inclusion. They don't have to be disability specific. Sam, have you got any tips there for families who are self-managing?
Yeah, all of the above is the answer. All of the above. Music therapy, art therapy, psychology, all of those things. They're all the therapy things, but art therapy can be done in a group and that could be fantastic. Same with music therapy. You know, you can get a lot out of that. And social skill groups, all of those things can be fun. They may not necessarily be funded. You might not be given money for them, but once you have your money in that capacity building bucket, you can spend it on that if it's reasonable and necessary. If you go through that list and it ticks all the boxes, go for it.
Wow, that's incredible. Do you want to say a few words about the NDIA's move towards creating some more flexibility for people who are self-managing? So I know that a lot of people who have been self-managing, and you've been a really strong advocate for this, Sam, in terms of let's just make the NDIS system easy for people who are self-managing. So I think the agency are hearing, is that your perspective?
Yeah, it certainly is. It certainly is. I've been talking to lots of little birds in the agency, and there's obviously there's a really strong, exciting move away from breaking down the barriers of those categories, those line items. So the idea would be that hopefully very soon we can start mixing up. And if you've got core funds and capacity, if you run out of capacity building funds and you still want to keep hiring therapists, you could use your core money to do that. So I'm very excited that that's going to happen. It certainly means that, you know, if you're self-managing, you're going to have more flexibility than ever, even before. It's going to be brilliant.
Well, as I said at the beginning, people want to use this funding to just get on with their lives and give children the opportunities that they need to reach those positive outcomes. So the less
all about the outcomes.
That's right. The less that the procedures and the scheme gets in the way of that, the better, is my opinion. And I hope that the government are really listening. I have every reason to believe that they are, and I'm hopeful that things will change and become much more flexible. Well,
I think that's right. I'm going to say one more thing.
Yes, go ahead.
I just want everybody to know that those lovely planners and the LACs that you're talking to are not, they're not the NDIS Bible. They're good people. They want to do the right things, but they're coming from their own biases and their own perspectives. So I have a bit of advice. When you want to spend your money on something and you've gone through reasonable and necessary and it ticks all the boxes, but you're still nervous and you really want to call up the NDIS or email your planner, my advice to you is just don't.
Good advice.
Go ahead and do what you need to do to get the outcomes you need for your child.
Well, that is fantastic advice. And I'll just put in a little plug. Stay connected with your peers. Stay connected with other people who are self-managing. I've always found that I've learnt the most and trusted the most other families who are in my situation. That's why we're putting on tonight's evening. I really hope that you've all enjoyed it. There were a couple of questions about reviews, Sam, and also the Autism Level 2 that's hit the media recently. But because they're not on the topic of self-management, I haven't addressed those. I thank those people for those questions, but tonight we haven't answered them because they were off topic from self-management. But I hope that we'll have an opportunity to address some of those questions directly to those people who answered them. But we'll continue here at Plumtree and through the Now and Next alumni to continue to support self-management. We really want to encourage families to see this as an easy opportunity and to start learning while their children are young, while it's fairly straightforward, and keep on growing in terms of your understanding experience. I learned a lot just by jumping off the edge and experiencing it, and your experience does grow with time and learning from others. So stay tuned, we'll be offering more of these kind of opportunities. Sam, I would love to welcome you to another webinar, because I have been really surprised about how much I have enjoyed tonight.
It's been lovely.
I hope it's been wonderful for everybody out there listening. And
I wish we could see all of everybody else out there. Hi, everyone.
Oh, there's so many thank yous coming in. Thank you all for coming, because I often subscribe to webinars and then forget to come. So I'm just super impressed that all of you with little children are here. Yay, well done, guys. So I just want a little plug. So Sam, we wanted to get you engaged tonight to build up a little bit of momentum for our now and next alumni conference. It's our second conference next June the 30th. And last year we had about 60 participants, and this year we're hoping that 150 alumni members will attend.
Exciting.
Incredible range of speakers, international and local. It is going to be phenomenal. If you haven't checked your email, because this is an invite-only event for now and next alumni members at the moment, exclusively for you guys, just check out the agenda. It's amazing. The agenda will be public fully soon, but on the flyer there's we've got people from the UK. Dr. Pippa Murray will be talking about the voice of children and how we as parents need to listen to the voice of our children. I think that's so important for when your children are little, to start making that transition as parents, to start thinking about listening to your child, and not just doing for your child all the time. We've got people from Finland. The Now Next program's gone to Finland. We've got a representative who's the president of Inclusion Europe from Finland. He's coming as well. We've got some Canadian representatives coming, and we've also got quite a big delegation from New Zealand coming. So the Now and Next group is really kind of gaining momentum. So check out your email if you haven't already. We'll also be doing a hard snail mail post out soon as well, and we'll let you know as soon as the agenda is released. And watch out in your Facebook and your mailbox. We'll get some more information out there. It's free, and there's childcare for up to 50 children, and there's more. There's breakfast for those of you who want to book in for breakfast in the morning. We want to get you there early. So welcome to all of you. Sam, once again, thank you so very, very much. It's been a delightful conversation with you, and I hope I have the opportunity to speak to you again like this. Thanks to all the participants. Thanks also to Stacey Tuma here at Plumtree, and to Jasmine Andrews, who've been the technical assistants and got all of this ready for us tonight. Good night, everybody, and enjoy your evening, and we'll speak soon.
Sounds great. Bye.